Stefan Molyneux got booted off of YouTube a few weeks ago, and a few days ago was invited to come on this channel called Modern Wisdom, so they can throw out some theories as to what may have been the straw that broke the camel's back. Maybe that's not the right way to put it, because he's got a clean slate based on his perspective, and indeed based on my perspective. He didn't violate any terms of service that I know about, so it's just YouTube overreacting. But I guess they came on here to discuss what may have been YouTube's final straw that broke the camel's back from their vantage point. So they're throwing out theory after theory, and then he went off on a bunch of other tangents that really didn't have anything to do with his removal. So while we can say pretty much unanimously that the removal is bogus and that he should get his channel back, it just struck me that it's been such a long time since I listened to anything he said, this interview, and he sort of went off on the usual things he used to go off on, the late 2000s, early 2010s, before his, I don't know what to call it, nativist awakening, I guess we can call it. And then he just peddled, and at one point he even just said that he still has, as an ideal, a stateless society. And I was just sort of taken aback by that, because I thought in the mid-2010s he renounced much of that, or maybe all of that. But apparently I was mistaken in that. So they said a lot of things, well, mostly he said a lot of things in the course of this interview. And the tricky thing with a response is, well, he goes off on a lot of tangents that aren't response-worthy, so I don't know if my play and respond approach is going to work. I may have to just edit out a lot of, not dead air, but just dead conversation that I can't respond to because it's just a tangent. But yeah, at various points when I was listening to this the first go-around, I was actually shaking my head, and I can't believe that he's just so stunted, even though he pivoted a few years ago. But now he's right back to, I guess, square one in his, when it comes to his political ideals. He's a very idealistic individual after all these years, but he's actually going off on all kinds of naive idealism. So that's also interesting. That's another reason why I want to respond to this. But just to qualify, the removal was completely bogus, as is almost always the case. It's always either inviting the Streisand effect, where you just remove something, it's going to go viral because it's been removed, or you're going to inculcate in the individual who has been removed, who may or may not make valid points, often makes bogus points, but you will inculcate in them an air of intellectual invincibility, and sure enough, in their listeners. And the fact that people of vastly different persuasions get removed, well, I guess that's never enough to make them stop and think, I guess it can't be invincibility, because we have mutually incompatible views, and yet we have been removed. So we can't all be right, and we can't all be invincible if we've got mutually incompatible views, and we all get removed. But that's not enough to persuade anyone, apparently, so I'm just going to say it in a video. Because I've been saying it all over the map, elsewhere. I've been saying it for years, and, well, every time someone gets removed, the pretense is because they just can't be taken down and everyone's afraid of them. So that's very frustrating that the needle doesn't move on the counterpoint to that. The counterpoint is either never made, or if it is made, it's not made by a loud enough mouthpiece. It's just made by the likes of me. So I'll make it in a video. But the most important thing is they shouldn't be removed unless they violate the terms of service, which he didn't violate. So now they're talking about, they're just brainstorming why he may have been booted. So I'm at the 10:30 mark. He said some dumb things in the first 10 minutes, but I can't play the whole damn thing because this is like 3 hours long and my battery will die out.
You could say, well, I am, I did high-def videos, there's a lot of storage, a lot of bandwidth, and so on. So from their standpoint, it's like, okay, well, he's expensive, and he's not making us any money because we've demonetized him, right? So that's why demonetization is often a prequel to these kinds of things, because once somebody is demonetized, the business case for keeping...
Oh, and I got him at 1.25. It's always tricky to say that someone who has been demonetized doesn't make money on a platform where the videos on the side are determined by the algorithm. So if someone comes to YouTube strictly for Molyneux, that's what they think they're strictly coming for. That sidebar video rundown is very hard to ignore, and that is purely determined by the algorithm. So you come for the Molyneux, but then you'll stay for the other things that are recommended that are often very catchy. Thumbnails are very, what's that term? I can't think of the term right now. It's, what the hell's the term for a catchy thumbnail? I can't think of the term right now. But yeah, it's clickbait. The thumbnails are very clickbaity. So even people who are demonetized, if they have a large enough audience, it's not in YouTube's interest to boot them because YouTube controls the algorithm on the side of those people's videos.
Them on becomes progressively more tenuous, right? So that, I think, is the first round. I'm expensive. They're not making any money from me. And some people really don't like me. And so there's negative PR around all of that kind of stuff. So it becomes, I think, progressively more...
Well, I'll throw my name in the really dislike you, but I would like you to stay on YouTube. Can we start some petition for Molyneux? I mean, the reason I'm singling him out is because as far as big channels go, when's the last time a bigger channel than this got booted like this unceremoniously, without a single explanation? No note from YouTube, no warnings, no nothing. Right? So I tend to ignore these bannings. At least I don't announce that I'm concerned by a banning in a video. I may leave the occasional supportive comment. But for a channel this big, yeah, there's absolutely no excuse for banning a channel this large with this much of a track record without explaining to the man what exactly he did, which they haven't done.
Difficult to make that kind of case. Now, if you're standing on principle, right, then it's like, no, man, free speech. You know, everything he says is legal. You know, he's got X.
Maybe I'm not going to have him at 1.25 because he does speak pretty quickly, so I'll bring him back to normal.
On, he's got data, he's got sources, he's got science, he's got facts.
And there's science and facts and data that you ignore. So I just got this lined up right now. So when he talks about this, he usually refers to things in the way of genetic essentialism. And I'm just going to link, the very first thing I link after this video in the low bar is this paper that I'm going to read just a brief excerpt from. In the last 2 decades, however, research in genetics has evolved into genomics, and our understanding of genes and genomes and how they relate to development, phenotypic traits, cell physiology, among other features, has radically changed. Citations. It seems to be underway a general shift within the scientific community from a more deterministic to a more probabilistic understanding of the relationship between genes and traits. Advances in genetics and genomics have made it clear that gene action and function should be conceived as embedded into multiple hierarchical levels, in which complex networks of interactions between components are the rule. Consequently, the probabilistic understanding of the structure, dynamics, and functions of genes demands that they are located in complex informational networks and pathways. Genetic science now tells us that despite the usefulness of the deterministic gene as an instrumental concept in some explanatory tasks, in realistic terms, it is not possible for any trait, even so-called single gene disorders, to be determined by genes only due to the influence of epigenetic and environmental factors. So, goes on, you can read the paper yourselves. I just like to see the sort of triumphalistic essentialists and determinists, biological or genetic determinists, however they want to use that term, respond to a paper like this and explain why this paper is wrong. I am one of the few people who treats this debate as an open book. Molyneux certainly doesn't treat it as an open book, even though decade after decade we see that just the previous decade's latest findings are outmoded. But yet, he's going to strike this triumphalistic posture, him and a lot of people who run in his circles, as if, well, we've got nothing else to learn. Anyone who denies the current findings, they're not denying it because this is a legitimate controversy. No, they're denying it because it's an illegitimate controversy and they're just scared of the conclusions. I don't deny that there's 3 groups, right? So there's the group that is actually legitimately made uncomfortable by some profoundly inegalitarian conclusion. There's the Molyneux group, and then there's the middle group that cites papers like this one to actually give detached, impartial, unbiased critiques of the data he pushes, and to say that the data he's pushing is not the very latest data.
And so this is a free speech issue. Now, if you're kind of principled from that standpoint, then the cost benefit.
And the reason him getting booted is very annoying is because it'll just instill a whole bunch of false confidence, invincibility, even more certainty that there's nothing to actually contest in his, whether we're talking about the racial science stuff, the IQ stuff. This is all just a closed book, and that's why they're banning him. And it's not a closed book. The last thing I want to do is see him banned for numerous reasons. But yeah, I'd be lying if I said one of those reasons wasn't that I don't want him to conceive of himself as invincible. And I certainly don't want the Streisand effect.
It is important, but it's not the final deciding factor. But if, for whatever reason, and I obviously don't know what deliberations occurred, but if there is something that occurs to that free speech principle, which is kind of happening all over the place these days, that suddenly apparently real weapons are just freedom of expression, but words are somehow assault in this kind of crazy upside down world we got at the moment. So,
oh, what percent of the people, I don't even care, the most irrational country, what percent of the people who are making arguments believe that?
I can certainly see, okay, bad, it could be bad publicity. He's very expensive, doesn't make us any money. So, I can certainly, again, if you kind of...
You're making them money because they position their algorithm below your videos. And I'm sure a lot of your viewers are enticed by that algorithm because it's very clickbaity and irresistible.
Detach that sort of free speech issue, then you get consequentialist arguments, and those are harder to... you can't really stand on principles when you've got consequentialists because you can...
I think you're confusing principles and act types, or some sort of agent-relative side constraints. It doesn't matter what it is, it can be consequentialized. A principle can be consequentialized. What consequentialists typically do is identify what is intrinsically good, what is intrinsically bad, and if they're a textbook consequentialist, they will want to maximize the intrinsic good or minimize the intrinsic bad by any sort of act type. It doesn't matter if they violate a certain kind of act type or a side constraint. That's back burner stuff. There's only ever a practical obstacle to the violations of those kinds of things. But how is that not a principle? How is identifying something that is intrinsically good and saying it ought to be maximized unprincipled?
Just invent outcomes that can have you do just...
They don't invent outcomes, they predict for outcomes. And the more erroneously they predict for outcomes, the more shitty a consequentialist they are. And oh god, no, I can get into. I didn't want to get into this, but I guess I can't resist it. Most theories, especially most modern moral theories, from modified deontology to modified Aristotelian ethics, they consequentialize to an extent. Now, there's a whole bunch of high-sounding prose that's all about individual inviolability and inalienable rights and all this sort of fun-sounding stuff. But then buried beneath all of that in some footnote is a clause that worries about disasters and that says, in the event of these disasters, we have disaster override, which is something that we can only control for by consequentializing that element of the theory. There's a reason most deontologists nowadays are what's referred to as threshold deontologists and who have renounced Kant. So, are you an absolutist? Are you saying that even when it comes to disaster override, a moral theory should not violate some sacred cow? I don't think you're saying that. I hope you're not saying that, because that's a pretty morally inept thing to believe. It's praying to a totem pole. So what you can fault consequentialism for, in a sort of, I would say, reasonable way, is for consequentializing damn near everything. But when you want to consequentialize absolutely nothing, then yeah, you do leave yourself vulnerable to let justice be done, though the heavens may fall. Though even that's an oversimplification, because you can consequentialize the advancement of justice. Right? So the big thing here is agent neutral versus agent relative standards for what ought to be done versus not done. Treating people as a means to an end, right? Should we do that or should we not do that? Well, if some omnipercipient cognizer comes by and assures you, if Omega comes by and assures you that by treating this one individual as a means to an end right now, you will actually maximize the amount of individuals in the long haul who will not be treated as a means to an end. So we can see in that sort of case, it doesn't really turn on some consequentialist versus non-consequentialist divide. It turns on a divide between agent-relative reasons and agent-neutral reasons for acting in a given way. And I'm always going to take the agent-neutral standard because I care about the situation as a whole. Because I'm not a moral navel-gazer who prioritizes my own moral virtue above goodness, generally speaking. But for that reason and a bunch more, you can't say consequentialists are not wedded to principles. It's only if you conceive of principles as act types and agent-relative constraints. Play back a bit.
This kind of crazy upside-down world we got at the moment. So I can certainly see, okay, bad, it could be bad publicity. He's very expensive, doesn't make us any money. So, I can certainly, again, if you kind of detach that sort of free speech issue, then you get consequentialist arguments, and those are harder to, you can't really stand on principles when you've got consequentialists because you can just invent outcomes to...
This is like the paradox of tolerance, the so-called paradox of tolerance, how typically in the liberal tradition, it is said that they are plagued by this. And of course, it only plagues the theory if the theory doesn't consequentialize, right? So it's a political theory, which doesn't mean that it's got its moral theory set in stone, right? All kinds of different moral thinkers, moral philosophers, can take on a given political philosophy like liberalism. So the ones who say that we should never consequentialize, then they are actually, to the extent that they endorse the liberal tradition, then they're plagued by the paradox of tolerance. Because they can be intolerant to the intolerant so as to maximize tolerance in the long haul. But a bog standard consequentialist who wants to endorse the liberal tradition, well, he can easily get around the so-called paradox of tolerance because he'll say, yes, let's be intolerant to the intolerant, because that tends to actually make it easier for us to get around to tolerance in the long haul, to maximize tolerance, as it were. Like if we identify tolerance as an intrinsic good, let's say the only source of the intrinsic good, then that's very easy. You can see how it would be very easy to get around the problems to that, because we would also, by stipulation, identify intolerance as the intrinsic bad and minimize that.
It can have you do just about anything.
I get it, yeah. From a video standpoint, is there anything you've uploaded over the last couple of weeks that you think would have warranted this return? Is there something that when you put it up you're like, not really too sure how that's going to land?
Well, certainly nothing. I mean, I've always tried to I've always explicitly and directly told people, use your words, not your fists, reason with people and peaceful solutions to these kinds of challenges. So, I mean, certainly nothing like that. I did have a great conversation with Tommy Sotomayor.
Well, I don't think he told that to the Second Amendment absolutists, honestly, because if there's one too many policies they don't like, specifically in terms of gun control, it wouldn't be about using the words and the fists, because they cite, it's one of the biggest reasons they cite the absolutist, not all, but certainly the absolutists, is because that at some point they're saying, no, we're done using words. We're going to use not our fists, but we're going to use our rifles to shoot down, well, not just the government, but anyone who will be in favor of the governments. Hell, even the ordinary citizens who may have driven the government to pass some law that we dislike. So if you're going to say words, not fists / rifles, then you actually do have to add the / rifles in there. But you never do that.
About policing, and he's this black commentator on YouTube and other places. He's also got a lot of hits over the years, and we've done a couple of shows together that was really great. And maybe because this...
Yeah, just bashing welfare and pretending that the welfare trap arguments have not been responded to, which they have been. I'll list just 2 papers that look at the welfare trap claims and respond to it. So anyone who wants to say that one of the biggest problems with the black community in the US right now is welfare program related, just respond to both, or just one of those two papers that I'm going to link in the low bar that actually shows people, especially the bottom quintile of income earners. 50 years ago, pre-Great Society, the bottom quintile of the economic strata were far poorer than they are now, and causally some of their improvement in terms of getting richer compared to how they were 5 decades ago, some of that is down to the Great Society programs. And if it weren't, if the welfare trap were an actual trap that just keeps people stuck in a perpetual cycle of poverty, you would expect that in countries that have far more generous welfare programs, you'd have more people stuck in that sort of cycle, and we don't see that. And I'm not going to list the standard society. We know the standard societies. We know everything from Northern Europe to Western Europe. Way more generous welfare programs, and yet people are nowhere near the bottom quintile, second quintile, all of it. The mobility, you see far more mobility than you see stuck in there's bad lifestyle too, let alone an inability to escape poverty. I see that far less. So if it were welfare per se, then it would actually track the higher levels of social spending a society tolerates, the more individuals in said society would be plagued by this endless cycle. That's not what we're seeing. I'm referencing this because he's talking about his talk with Sotomayor. Sotomayor, from everything I've heard of him, is very much on the anti-welfare bandwagon. So the two papers respond to claims typically made through, I'm not even going to refer to it as a theory, as a sort of mindset. This is a mindset, because there's other things that is at the end beneath the driving force for the abolition of welfare seekers. It's not even a theory. There's some pre-political discomfort they have with the idea of redistribution, so that they've already determined what the answer has to be. So, respond to those two papers, or hell, just one of them. I haven't seen a single social scientist, economist, I've looked for it, I haven't seen anyone address either of these two papers that I'm going to link to. That just shows rigorously, no, it hasn't trapped people in welfare. Most people who have received these benefits have come out of it better off than they were, either materially or at the level of lifestyle. It's not to say that everyone always comes out better, but far more individuals come out better than are made worse for it. So, Tommy Sotomayor sucks, and he should address the papers, since he's going to bash welfare so often.
The whole racism thing gets thrown around, that me having a really productive and enjoyable conversation and a debate and disagreements and so on with a black fellow, maybe that had something to do with it. The video that was waiting in queue was me having a really productive conversation about policing in America with two
I think this may have been the video you did way back in 2018, the Poland thing, about how, well, you're not a white nationalist, but you're an empiricist, and you see that Poland has got far less friction, and you pretty much connected the dots to Poland being a lot less racially heterogeneous, right? So, if that video kept getting views, which I think most of your videos just, they kept getting views, right? In the post-George Floyd world, you probably had one too many anti-white identitarians, let's call them, stumble upon that video, flag it, and yeah, that was enough. Even though it was well over 2 years old at this point, yeah, it was up for grabs. And so it's a sort of new world, and I'm not saying you should have considered taking that video down, but you shouldn't be diagnosing recent conversations. You should be diagnosing some of your greatest hits, let's just say. Greatest hits in terms of flirtations with what your standard white nationalist will want to hear. The Poland speech, when you were walking in the snow. It was amusing, and no one should have flagged it, but if you're looking for reasons, that's my 2 cents as to what may have gotten you booted. It was that video.
Cops. One was black, one was white, and we were having lots of conversations about some of the strengths and weaknesses of policing in America, coming up with a lot of solutions and all that kind of stuff. Because there are a lot of people, not speaking about YouTube, of course, because I don't know, but there are a lot of people out there.
I think he plugs his BitChute, so I'll link to his BitChute thing, where this video may have ultimately ended up being uploaded, with this conversation with a black and white cop. But warning, I headed over to BitChute for the first time roughly a month ago, and in about 25 minutes I spent there, I felt that during that short time span, roughly 25 minutes, I felt like I had 10 hours of anti-Semitism pumped into me. And then the comment sections, Jesus. I mean, if you want to feel like what it was like to be a some sort of visible minority in certain pockets of Europe in the 30s, 40s of the 20th century, yeah, that's like traverse the sort of standard comment section on BitChute, and you'll probably get a decent enough idea. I mean, they're a humorous bunch, but they are odious.
They kind of want to just burn it down, like everything that's going on in the West. They're just like, raise it down and start again, because the whole damn thing is rotten from top to bottom.
Well, like the quotes about how the tree of liberty has to be watered every 20 years. Oh, we're not talking about that. We're just going to ignore that.
They believe, and maybe, just maybe, the idea that there could be glimmers of productive solutions. I don't know. It's almost like if you're some
glimmers of productive solutions. We have been on a trajectory of solutions, and the best way to demonstrate that is to, and I might do this actually, just play chapters from a book like Enlightenment Now, written by Steven Pinker. Now people do these hot takes, try to debunk the book. The book is, I have the audio version of it, so I don't know how many pages it has, but the audio version, it's got like over 20 hours, somewhere between 20 and 30 hours of content, right? So anyone who wants to debunk that, the book doesn't say that glimmer, like this is such a weak way of putting, no, we have had solution after solution, because indeed things have gotten better. People who want to be declinists, right? No, I'm a pessimist, I'm not a declinist, two very different things. People who want to play the declinism card have attacked that book, and it's just interesting that a book that's that long, someone does a 15-minute hot take debunking and thinks that, well, that's enough to be persuasive. It just stuns me and tells you all you need to know about the mindset. I mean, think about a book that's that long and how many claims a book like that packs. And for someone to think that they're doing something worthwhile to undermine such a project by uploading like 15 or 20-minute video. Like, what, you're gonna address 2% of the book's claims in that time? Really? So this is relevant because he's talking about glimmers of solutions. At any time I hear someone say that, ooh, we're just gonna have to start thinking drastically differently so that we overturn this declinism, I immediately get annoyed because, well, they're probably not thinking about something like that book and the data it packs, and I just immediately have the impulse to plug the book and to talk about how whoever has tried to debunk it so far may have debunked at most 2 or 3% of it. To debunk the whole of it, you're probably going to have to write a book as long as that one to assess most of its claims.
Callous, cold-hearted guy, and your grandmother's dying and she's going to leave you a lot of money and you're really heavily in debt and so on, and the doctor comes along and says, I think she's making a recovery, and you're like, oh,
is there a plug we can pull?
Yeah, oops, tripped over the cord. So
it's interesting because this would actually be a legit moral dilemma for a effective altruist. Not a cold-hearted, callous guy, but for an effective altruist who has had a, let's say, lengthy streak of assisting people with their spare income, and now they're in a sort of financial jam, they don't have any spare income, and grandma's dying. So if you do have that sort of a reaction, is that a moral predicament, or is that actually just something that, especially if the grandma's like an old hag who's been insufferable for a long time? I don't think that impugns the character of the individual who has that sort of reaction, depending on what they wish to do with the inheritance once they get it. If they're excited, genuinely excited, because now they get to go back to helping people who are desperately off, that's fair play. But I'm going to play this back a bit because I don't even know how they transitioned to talking about an old grandma who's dying and a guy who's callous and who's giddy about it because of his own self-interest. I'm going to just go back a bit here.
Yeah, like everything that's going on in the West, they're just like, raise it down and start again, because the whole damn thing is rotten from top to bottom, they believe. And maybe, just maybe, the the idea that there could be glimmers of productive solutions. I don't know. It's almost like if you're some.
I mean, if you're a proponent of statelessness, then it really is damn near top to bottom. Things are very wrong given how involved the state is in so many aspects of our lives. So why are you now taking this sort of weaker stance when your ideal is, I would say, even further away as the sort of ideal of the average Black Lives Matter protester who has burned down a police station? At least they only take issue with the police stations and a few other sectors of society. You take issue with more sectors of society, so your utopia is further cry than theirs.
Callous, cold-hearted guy, and your grandmother's dying, and she's going to leave you a lot of money, and you're really heavily in debt, and so on. And the doctor comes along and says, "I think she's making a recovery," and you're like,
"Oh, this has gone on for over 30 minutes now, almost minute 31. It's going to be forever." Yeah, I'm not going to get a chance to play most of what I wanted to play because just played just under 5 minutes now of their stuff, and it's already taken 30 minutes. Fuck. I really like doing play respond videos, but it just doesn't work because there's so many little things that they say that I can't ignore. But I haven't gotten to the main course yet.
"Oh,
Is there a plug we can pull?
yeah, oops, tripped over the cord." So, if people really do want the system to burn to the ground, then people of every race or ethnicity having productive conversations about how to improve things, it may not be first on your shopping list of snacks to have.
There's so many layers going on at the moment. When you think about the level of complexity that you need to be able to hold in your mind to just exist in 2020.
No, most people are clueless about all the other debates. So people know about the debates taking place within whatever. They're peddled to them by dinosaur media and then by digital media. So those two media cycles dictate what people are sort of trying to figure out in their own heads. But that really is far from complex. You want to see something complex? Read up on the dynamic choice literature. Read up on a number of things where, I just know for me, right, when I actually have to concentrate to get something, it's never by watching a single YouTuber or by reading any of these books that are pimped by YouTubers and their guests who come on. It's rarely, if ever, anything that's politically relevant. Anytime I have to actually concentrate and engage in cognitive strain to get a concept, it's always some extremely obscure, arcane concept that's got none to do with anything anyone is interested in. So what a strange statement. Oh, we got to keep up with all things. Well, what? You got to read your 50th COVID article in no, stop reading the stupid articles. The articles are not going to say anything new.
Like, if you started this year, you have to have gained a couple of IQ points just to have been able to move through the year, you know what I mean?
No, a lot of the stuff that comes out is just a regurgitation of yesterday's news. Today's news, 99% same as yesterday's news. It really, the pace is not that insane. If you actually are going to be overwhelmed, it'll be because you've read something that no one else is talking about, and it's left you mind-fucked. Dynamic choice literature, and trying to incorporate it into your life so you can actually be less of a procrastinator and more of a doer. And even being a doer, like I'm trying to figure it out for myself. Should I be more of a doer? I don't think so. Because the moment I finish something and post it, I feel kind of accomplished for a few minutes, maybe a couple of hours tops. And then the next thing I know, I'm bothered by one of the many other projects I have in queue that I haven't finished. So the satisfaction to dissatisfaction ratio, even when you accomplish things, is... This is a bit of a tangent of my own, sorry. They made me think back to the dynamic choice literature, which has actually plagued me when it comes to getting stuff done. And there's valid and invalid reasons why I don't get stuff done more often. But talking about how all the news cycle stuff is very complicated to keep tabs. It's like, no. Majority of these COVID articles that people are reading and sharing and stuff like that are, it's like 90% same month after month. Very few updates. So I guess they're talking about the 2020 will go down as the pandemic year, so that's why I'm associating his claim with the pandemic. But maybe he's talking about something else that's making people so engaged in all these different things that they've gained 2 IQ points, as he said it.
You get to July and everyone's had this real multifaceted, like 10th dimension workout to just be able to get into the nuance of what's happening. It would appear that, I don't know, I'm trying to think, because your content...
I don't know, man. I'm trying to think back. I was bitching about circle jerks and echo chambers for years and years and years, but even I could not have thought that they would be this cartoonish all these years later. And if they're this cartoonish, it's probably because people are failing to appreciate the complexity of things. If they can actually comment on a video like this, there's 2,707 comments, and there's very recent ones, even though the video was posted on July 11th. And there's recent ones that are making the sort of same high five, fuck the outgroup comments that the very first ones made. So the fact that this is the mindset, now you think you're contributing something to a comment section where your comment, the spirit of your comment was essentially made 2,706 times, and then you post 2,707th comment in that same spirit. You think you've accomplished something? You think that's a person who keeps complexity and subtlety in their cognitive arsenal? No, I don't think so. I think that's a person looking for some sort of interpersonal prestige. And I think that's the norm in 2020. I don't think people have done some 180 just because the information overload has been... It's not even... There is no information overload. You just got to know what not to pay attention to. Most things. But yeah, people have not grown to appreciate complexity just because there's a lot of information hitting them.
For the most part, was philosophy, right? It's a philosophy channel. Now, obviously, philosophy covers a...
He's a philosophical populist, Stefan Molyneux is. It's a philosophy channel from a guy who, up until a few months ago, didn't know that libertarianism is a metaphysical doctrine. It's a doctrine that exists in a completely apolitical realm. Determinism versus compatibilism versus libertarianism. Libertarianism being the position that is advancing the most robust version of free will. He didn't know that until he was responding to a Rationality Rules video, where Rationality Rules referred to that as libertarianism, because Rationality Rules was taking the opposite view. So this guy, Molyneux, for years has been peddling a robust version of free will, and up until a few months ago didn't even know that that was referred to as libertarian view on free will. Right? So how cloistered do you have to be from the philosophical community to not know that? How up your own ass do you have to be with the philosophy you're doing to be oblivious to the fact that libertarianism is associated with the pro-free will view in metaphysics? It's infuriating. And he got away with it. Barely anyone gave him flack for it. See, to me, that's disqualifying, because it shows you're just not on the wavelength of philosophers. Even entry-level philosophers know this. But he's viewed as a sort of household name in philosophy by the sort of bypasser. Not by anyone in the community, the elitists, right? Because there's some things we absolutely have to be elitists about. Because the average person is just too fucking busy. Way too busy to actually immerse themselves in all the concepts to get things right. To get things, to be familiar enough to actually be able to keep having the conversations. And that's okay. It's okay if you're too busy for this stuff. This stuff is very time consuming and very unrewarding. Because you can read philosophy in the Ivy League for over a decade and still stumble upon completely new ideas, new debates, stuff like that you've never seen, because it's just that endless. And if someone's going to be a philosophical populist, they should at least brand themselves as that and say, you know, I'm just doing this dumbed down stuff that like 100 million subscribers can not be confused by, because you don't really have to apply yourself. But yeah, I'm completely out of step with the philosophical community and the sort of rigorous spirit of self-critique. And he sort of models himself after his idol, Ayn Rand, because she was sort of outside the community for more or less the same reasons. She was just doing her own thing, and she did it in a, you know, fictionalized wonder world of fiction literature, and he's doing it by uploading videos.
A broad range of sins. But I'm trying to work out what the reason is. You know, I woke up on Monday, saw that your channel and a bunch of others had been removed. I'm thinking, like, I haven't seen anything from you that would have warranted that. You know, with Alex Jones, there's just... he's screaming and shouting and talking about turning the frogs gay and stuff.
And even that he did 4 years before he finally got booted. So, yeah, what's the craziest thing? I mean, he does things that are crazy, but his craziness doesn't go viral. So I don't know whose attention he caught 2 years ago when they booted him. But it was ridiculous. Probably the most ridiculous purging ever is that just someone felt the need to get him off of a platform like this when he is the clown. Oftentimes conspiracy theorists are annoyed with Alex Jones because they view him as controlled opposition because he really is that ridiculous. So it's almost like you want someone like him, someone who is that ridiculous and just funny too. I mean, I'm not saying that if I had watched Alex Jones week after week, I would have found it funny. But yeah, once in a while, there's nothing I like to do more than to just kick back and watch the occasional Alex Jones video, preferably a best of, preferably a remix, because he's just naturally a very funny person. So it's just the sort of epic lull. Yeah, where do you go when you want epic lulls? You go to an Alex Jones remix video. And the fact that they felt the need to remove that and make him think that he's invincible and that his arguments can't be taken on by anyone, well, Jesus, we must have some extremely stupid people either flagging videos or whatever other criteria the YouTube staff are using to boot people. I don't know, but it just, they're aliens. They're aliens to everything that I am. They're aliens to my psychology. If you think Alex Jones is a threat, you need to check yourself.
And you think, Alex, man, like it's a matter of time before this is going to happen. But I hadn't seen anything from you, and that was why I was interested in hearing you sort of try and steelman YouTube's position in terms of the rhetoric that you're putting across. But it would appear that you're kind of
it's a post-George Floyd world. So everything that he did before George Floyd that was still getting a lot of views, it just seemed like it was no longer really appropriate. That was probably their thought process, if I were to steelman it. But I don't know if it can be steelman because it's just that ridiculous. If you don't violate terms of service, and even if you do violate, they gotta tell you explicitly what you did wrong. But since this is a video about the banning, and he's gonna go into all sorts of other tangents now that are not about the banning, that I'll probably respond to in a separate video because this is now 43 minutes. I'm just gonna announce that whatever my next video is going to be, I am not going to have the username that I'm having right now. I'm going to get rid of my anti-bullshit man username. I'm going to come up with my new name. So if you see me in a video icon and you see a different screen name, it is me, but I'm just tired of this username. I've been on the brink for a long time actually of actually going through with something like this, and I'm finally going to go through with it because the algorithm is messing with me in one too many ways that I don't like. For a long time, I was sort of okay with being shadow banned. Not okay, but I wasn't that distraught by it because, well, do I really want to increase the popularity of this channel by leaps and bounds? I was always thinking I don't, because increasing it by leaps and bounds, that's a responsibility, right? I'm not the sort of person who can actually just sit by as commenter after commenter stops by, writes a thoughtful critique or halfway thoughtful critique, and just not address them one by one. I'm not someone who can do that. I actually have to get down and go one-on-one with each commenter who is sane and who takes me on. Takes something I said on, and I engage in a lot of, maybe not nowadays, but back in the day I engaged in a lot of, I tackled a lot of thorny issues, so there's certainly grounds to critique what I've said in the past. And I just always, it bugs me, just going to work, knowing that I have to go to work and not have time to respond to every last person that comments on an old or new video. It just bugs me. I can't concentrate. So that's why I was never really that bothered by the fact that the algorithm, or whatever force that demoted me. And I was demoted, I'm pretty sure, because I have a naughty word in my username. But now I'm thinking, I'm not even getting alerts when someone comments on videos, whether they're my videos, whether it's a response to a comment I leave on someone else's video. And maybe it's the fact that I have the naughty word in my screen name. Maybe that's why I'm not even getting these alerts that most other people, or just about everyone else that I've spoken to, is still getting. Right? So the idea that I've commented on some video and someone's replied to me and I never knew it because I never got the alert, that's really daunting. So if there's even a small chance that I can change that by coming up with a name that doesn't have a naughty word in it, I'll do that. I'll do that as a trial and error, if nothing else. So this is just, for whoever might watch my next video. Expect to see me in the thumbnail, but different username. And don't think that you shouldn't click on it just because it's a different username, because now I'm telling you it'll still be a standard me video. I just don't know when that's going to happen. I want to finish this, but this is nearly 46 minutes, and this is only 15 minutes and 50 seconds in, and Jesus, I don't know. Maybe I'll just do another part and I'll tack it onto this, and I'll just have a really long video, but let's play a bit more.
A little bit of a loss as to what that could be.
Well, so the big question that occurs in society is to some degree economic. It's to some degree educational. The big question is, why do some people do well and why do some people do badly? Right? Like, how it goes in sports, in music, other disciplines. Like 95% of the money goes to 5% of the people.
No, it's more like 80-20. So if it's 95 to 5 now, and the 80-20 rule is yesterday's business, then Jesus, then we really are. It's just the closest thing ever to a literal winner-take-all economy. But yeah, actually, I do want to say a lot about this, because doing well and badly, as measured by income or some other material accumulation, you got to control for a bunch of other things, namely stress. And he's going to talk about like East Asians doing better than whites, and it's like, East Asians at what price? At the price of being a scholastic slave who sacrificed. No, actually, no, they didn't sacrifice. Their parents sacrificed their childhood for their kids' future best interest, without being able to prove that that was at all in their future best interest. You can prove that, yeah, the more a kid studies, the more you can actually get them to earn more in the future, but at what cost? Because you can tell, I can tell you right now, if you're just talking about strictly my interests, not what I would do with the money if I were a millionaire or billionaire, but just from my vantage point, if I had to sacrifice some of the best times I've had during my childhood and adolescence, which I absolutely would not have had if I had had the sort of tiger parents that would have forced me to be a scholastic slave. Honestly, you can just show me the counterfactual, where I was deprived of certain experiences, peak experiences during my childhood, when I had free reign to do whatever the hell I wanted, because I didn't have to study, because I had a certain amount of self-determination as a child. You show me that had I not had those experiences, but resulting in my future self being a millionaire, or hell, even a billionaire, like, I would have said, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how good I have it financially in the future. If you make me a scholastic slave for over a decade, or hell, even just for 5 years as a child, when peak experiences are different when you're a child than when you're an adult. There's a certain peak, a certain intrigue, when it comes to positive experiences, they just cannot be recaptured or rekindled as an adult, in my experience. So that's why I am very much opposed to this one-dimensional talk about who does well and who does better, who does well and who does badly, because it's very much skewed to accumulation and occupational success, and that's supposed to correlate with a bunch of other things, and maybe it does, but the people who do the most well are actually the people who have had most of their potential best experiences as children stolen from them, deprived from them by disciplinarian parents, grotesquely ultra-disciplinarian parents who thought they were doing them favors. And I just wish that we could do the counterfactual, run the counterfactual, and actually just see the two lives where you have a relaxed sort of scholastic schedule. You still have pretty much when school's out, you get to do whatever the hell you want, seeing as how you have to go to school 5 days a week. I don't think people would be grateful unless they are utterly indoctrinated into thinking that careerism and status are more important than certain peak experiences you can only have as a child and as an adolescent. I am very perturbed by this because I came here when I was 10. I knew a lot of Chinese students went to migrate with me. Their descriptions of how much they had to study in their prior to come to Canada, and in Canada too, but especially back home, it just mortified me. And the thought was always that, well, once you get to be an adult, you'll see that that's actually the wiser path. And it's only the wiser path if the alternative to earning that much, something like above 100 grand, because we know that life satisfaction and income gains, they correlate strongly up until roughly 100 grand. Following 100 grand, it's just a wank. It's just status and all these values about social standing and respectability and stuff like that. But those kids are robbed of childhood. And someone's got to make that point. And the only time it's actually worth taking seriously and perhaps the only time it's actually justified to make them cram is if the parent has an indication that there's no middle ground. There's either extreme financial success and specialization and becoming a part of that professional managerial class. It's either that or criminality. Like, my child will not be able to situate themselves in some sort of middle ground. They'll either be top tier careerist, or they'll engage in some sort of criminality, or they'll fall into some sort of drug use and drug addiction and God knows what else. It just ignores a whole bunch of mid-tier earnings that are easily possible to do if you just know how to play your cards right post-high school. Skip college, learn a trade, you'll be all right. Or hell, you don't even have to you don't have to learn a trade. You just have to not be a big spender. Easiest thing to do to not be a big spender, don't have rugrats.
You know, like for every Queen or Rolling Stones or insert modern artist here that I'm not aware of, you know, there are, 1,000 garage bands who never seem to get out of the pub circuit, right?
And maybe that's the better path for them, right? I mean, how many of the famous acts have actually just gone into, and I'll point that out again, drug addiction and legal troubles and just the stresses of fame. How are we going to quantify the gains of fame versus the stresses of fame? We see a lot of people who are famous just crumble. It's hard to quantify the pros and cons of that, but we shouldn't automatically assume that the bands who just played in pubs, that they're failures. Maybe they aspired to be more famous than they were, but who the hell knows? Maybe it was a blessing in disguise that they never went viral or blew up, so to speak. If they had fun playing, if the pub audience applauded, maybe they sold a few shirts or records within the pub, within the small club or something like that, that's still, by historical standards, that's pretty damn good. It's just the modern standards where popularity means you got to sell 100 million records. Well, that's quite the historical anomaly.
And it's a big question. And people from the days of the pre-Socratics onwards have been wrestling with this question of like, okay, why do East Asians make more than whites? Why do
Yes, because they enslave their children, essentially.
why
And maybe not even enslave
do
them,
some
maybe just engage in some sort of tactics of psychological terrorism, where it's either be the top tier careerist or be a failure in life and damn near destitute, and just completely ignore telling the kid that most of the options that are not at the extreme ends.
basketball players do really well and others don't? Like it's a huge
say
question.
basketball?
Why do some basketball players do really well and others don't? Like it's a huge question. Now the Marxists have an answer, the leftists have an answer, which is it's exploitation. You know, the reason that the capitalist makes more money than his workers is because their work is worth $15 an hour, but he only pays them $14 an hour, so he pockets that extra dollar.
The world today is nothing like the world in which, when Das Kapital was written, Communist Manifesto was written. So that's point number one. That world of yesteryear, there really was a near totalizing dividing line between the laborer and the owner. The laborers busted their ass in ways that today's average laborer who lives in a Western society with all sorts of occupational protections, it's night and day. The laborer of the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries and the laborer today, it's night and day. And likewise, the elites. What did the elites brag about back in the day? They bragged about their leisure time. The aristocrats, right? Today's elites brag about never having a moment to themselves. Endless busyness. And the striking thing about this is the point is made most often, this point that I just made, is made most often by not your Peter Schiffs, not your, let's see, who else is sort of workaholic type. No. It's not the sort of household names who are pro-workaholics. No, it's made by Daniel Markowitz, the guy who wrote the book Critiquing Meritocracy, who is himself a Marxist. Just amazing. He's fully aware of this fact, and yet he clings to the Marxist doctrine. If anything, invalidates Marxist doctrine. Well, there's three things that, broadly speaking, invalidate on arrival Marxism. One is the idea that there's laws of history. The other is that you're going to tell someone that their primary oppression is class oppression, irrespective of any other circumstance of their life. So Stefan mentioned basketball. So if someone is really obsessed with playing in the NBA, but is 5'2" and can't dribble worth shit, but really loves the NBA and is just crushed by the fact that he'll never be admitted to the NBA. Doesn't matter what economic system you implement, what social property scheme you implement, whether it's social or whether it's individualistic, private property, like that person's just not going to play in the NBA ever. Either because they're disabled or height challenged or whatnot. So a Marxist wants to come along and tell him, the fact that you're obsessed with this goal and the fact that it crushes you, that you can't achieve it, no, that's not your primary struggle. Your primary struggle is class struggle. I can give example after example why someone is perfectly within reason to think that, well, class struggle might be important, but it's not the thing that's bothering me in life and that I'm struggling against in my own life. No, the doctrinaire Marxist will say that it doesn't matter what they think, psychologically, subjectively, there is a truth to this, and it is class solidarity. Class solidarity is the best sort of solidarity you can come up with. So there's a two, and then the third one is just the drastic difference between both the laborers of yesteryear and the laborers of today, and how much more free reign your average laborer today has, especially if they're an office worker. They can surf the net. I don't know a single person in my workplace who doesn't spend hours within a single shift just surfing the net. Just night and day compared to yesteryear. But the story of this sort of resurgent Marxism, it really is just stuck in the 18th century, as if all these gains had not been made. So both at the labor level and at the ownership level, Maybe more so with the petty bourgeoisie than the other bourgeoisie, but even the non-petty bourgeoisie are far more in the workaholic mindset than those of yesteryear. And then we can get into other sort of hybrid points where it's not easy to tell who is strictly a laborer, who's strictly a worker, in the sense that most people have some sort of stock investments. They've got the 401ks. They've got they work, but they also have income from non-labor sources. And with each passing decade, more and more of the working class and the middle class end up in those kinds of in the situations where they are investing in something. So for those reasons and others, Marxism is dead on arrival, and I don't know why Molyneux is talking about Marxism. He's invited on to do this video to talk about his being removed, and he just randomly brought up Marxism now as if it's a threat. It may have been resurgent, but Corbyn lost, Sanders lost. I don't think it's really resurgent that much anymore. I think they've gone back to the drawing board, and rightfully so. But here we are talking about Marxists as if it's something. No. The problem right now, if he wants to bitch about someone that I'll gladly join him on, is the anti-white identitarians. But if you're going to bitch about them, you also got to bitch about the pro-white identitarians and the complete lack of a logistical plan for how you're going to have a some sort of reverting to a blood and soil nation in countries where there's millions upon millions, if not tens of millions, of non-whites that you're going to have to purge. All right, so right now it really is the racial topic is the primary topic, unfortunately, and I will say much more about that in future videos. But he just pivots to Marxists because he thinks that people who are aggrieved, people who want to be doing better financially and who are aggrieved that they're not doing better, as if the majority of those people have some familiarity with Marxist doctrine. No, I don't think they do at all. I think they watch MSNBC. And MSNBC, and let's see, even CNN, and even millionaire. Like, I'll link to the TED Talk guy by that multi-millionaire who in 2014, he did a TED Talk video. He is captain of industry, and he says, yeah, we've been getting away with murder, us top-tier earners, and we should pay more in taxes, and we should contribute more in all these other ways. I wish I could remember his name now, but I'll link to his video. It's a multi-millionaire, if not billionaire, who I'm pretty sure he's either read and rejected every inch of Marxist doctrine, or he's just completely unfamiliar with it. And despite that, he can see that a winner-take-all economy is not in his best interest. More and more millionaires and billionaires have come out and realized that it's not in our best interest, right? You don't need to be a Marxist to understand that everything from copyrights, patents, IP laws, like the fact that it could have stayed shorter and weaker, it didn't have to get made longer and stronger. We wouldn't have surrendered anything in the way of additional innovations. From that to a bunch of other issues, Marxism absolutely adds zero insight. You can get to the right answer without accepting or even familiarizing yourself with any inch of Marxism. So he's going to keep going on about Marxism. I'm going to have to stop this because it's now over an hour. But it's an interview talking about his banning, and he just randomly pivots into Marxism. It's insane.
And he gets rich by stealing from them. He's not necessary. They're the ones doing the actual work. He's just sitting in the office in his bathrobe counting his money that he's stolen from the workers. And so their answer as to...
The overwhelming majority of people who take issue with something in today's structure, like in an American structure, it's about tax policy. So the taxes are not progressive enough. You know, I kept going on about the tax issue, but I'm actually going to just swap that and discuss this, because there's so many interesting ways that are never discussed. So many interesting ways in which people who would be critical of Molyneux's model or models of economic systems statelessness essentially. Laissez-faire, pure laissez-faire, as pure as you can get it to be. And there's just so many ways to criticize that without defending anything that he is criticizing when he goes off on Marxism. And so this is one such paper that you never see discussed, you never see thought about, you never see capital markets and job creation in the 20th century and all the differences. So, conclusion. Over the past generation, we have seen a shift from the career to the job to the task. It is becoming increasingly feasible to hire labor on demand, while the impact of Uber and other platforms are first being felt in personal services. Their basic model can be readily extended to other forms of employment. In particular, the low-wage service sector is ripe for urbanization. How would a stateless model deal with that, I wonder? It seems highly likely that many current jobs will be reformatted in the coming years as tasks for contractors. Moreover, it is not the level of skill that matters so much as the ability to specify what the task is. From the provision of medical care to college lectures, a wide range of activities currently classified as, quote, jobs could easily become, quote, tasks paid on a piece rate. In the corporate sector, the pursuit of shareholder value has become increasingly detached from the creation of employment. Corporations with tiny employment roles and assets can have vast market capitalizations, such as Facebook, while large employers often have modest market caps, such as Kroger. Moreover, firms going public since the turn of the 21st century tend to start and remain small. What is good for shareholders may not be good for employment. The challenge for those that seek to create economic security for the future is to recognize the mismatch between our old model of the economy and the nature of 21st century enterprises. As a first step, we need to abandon the idea that entrepreneurs are job creators, or that easing the path to IPO will create employment. Entrepreneurship aimed at creating shareholder value is unlikely to create many jobs in the US. And so that's just the conclusion, but I encourage people to read the full paper if they want to be more familiar with why this is only, the solution to this is only in the cards if the state sector steers certain sections of the economy, and ideally a state sector that is led by the sort of economic experts, or at least economic advisors, who understand this as a problem. So either the advisor will have a prominent role or the expert himself will have full knowledge of all these problems. And it's not something you can do when you engineer nothing in the economy. So you don't have to believe in wall-to-wall economic planning to understand that some level of engineering around the edges is important, because the economy of the future is going to look nothing like the economy of the past. And even the economy of the past, the laissez-faire model, did not create stability and security. And it's especially not going to be the case in the future. And so I encourage everyone to read this in full. It was very eye-opening for me. So following that, I also just want to emphasize what I referenced earlier. He kept going on about welfare in the video, and I'm not going to play the rest of the video because it's just, like I said, it would take forever. But here's what I was thinking when I was talking about how when you do a international comparison of welfare, and I'll link to all of this stuff, the facts speak for themselves. You can look at it at either at the level of relative poverty rates before and after the introduction of welfare, or you can look at it from the standpoint of absolute poverty rates. I mean, picture's worth 1,000 words, and anyone ignoring this and just telling stories, narrativizing the story of welfare as a failure, the only way you can do it is to be completely oblivious to the realities of this. Before, after. This is the one that matters, absolute poverty. But if you're, the sort of person who also cares about relative poverty, well, I mean, the story is not as impressive, but it's still, in every single instance, it's more impressive than not. And here are the two welfare studies that I referenced early on in the video. I'll link to all of this in the low bar. And I think that's it. What else do I need to mention? I mean, Molyneux talks about investing in people being naive because of the he views everything at the level of natural talents and things like that. So people will naturally find their niche, and the moment the state invests in individuals, that's just a lost cause. And it might just be a lost cause in select cases where the recipient of the benefits is well into adulthood. Though even then, it's not entirely a lost cause. Even then, Molyneux would exaggerate the extent to which the interventions fail. But in some cases, I do believe they do, and notably when we're talking about affirmative action, when we're talking about the sort of asterisk heads up in some sort of occupational success domain, yeah, I'm fully against all that. Any sort of affirmative action, even affirmative action based on class. So if you're really poor, nothing's done about your poverty all throughout your childhood, and then once you reach the stage of entry-level workforce, you're given some sort of a heads up because you came from an extremely poor background. And people more talented or skilled or hardworking or credentialed or educated than you are not given such a heads up because they came from a more affluent background. I oppose all that, but that doesn't mean that we can talk about interventions as a one-size-fits-all, because we know there's just a treasure trove of literature showing the positive effects of interventions in early life. Highlight some new directions for prevention and intervention that are rapidly emerging at the intersection of developmental science, pediatrics, child psychology, and psychiatry and public policy. I mean, I can just link to study after study showing that early on, the more you do at the level of public policy to help children escape the damaging effects of being born without a pot to piss in, essentially, that has long-term success. This has been repeated over and over again. The success of early life interventions, not K through grade 12. No, I'm talking pre-kindergarten, pre-public school. We know that reading to children causes all sorts of advantageous effects for the brain development. Playing classical music. I mean, I can just go on and on about these things that unfortunately, parents who are piss poor just reliably fail to do for their children. And if public policy can improve that, then why would you on principle oppose it? And so I do agree that a lot of public policy currently is misdirected. A lot of money gets spent on post-adolescence, pretty much people in their adulthood, and trying to give them a leg up because of how rough they've had it. But seeing as how we have scarcity, right? The budget is scarce. There's only so much money to go around. We should focus on the most cost-effective interventions. And the most cost-effective interventions repeatedly have been shown to take place in early childhood. That's when the brain's developing at its most potent level. And that's when we can make the greatest changes, positive changes. So I ought to get on the board of some sort of budgetary committee instead of just mentioning this in videos, because yeah, I mean, nothing's going to get done by talking about it here. But that's neither here nor there. I just want to point out that, yeah, Molyneux is unduly pessimistic. He highlights the silly interventions, like affirmative actions, and neglects promising ones in the way of childhood poverty alleviation. And he annoys me because of that. So